Good afternoon. Welcome to the third or fourth, but hopefully the last in this series about the coronavirus. I think I've wasted enough of your time. You've wasted enough of my time. I've said what I've got to say. If anyone wants to take note, great. If not, I'm going to get on with what I am still doing. Actually, is my work as a lawyer and studying the Jewish sacred texts, and perhaps even I'll be able to put some of that online, since no one is available to attend in person any lectures, etc. Maybe that will be of some greater use to some people. But we've come this far, so I'm just going to give my final thoughts, bring it all together, what I've been talking about till now. Till now, I've been focusing quite a bit on the negative, what my humble personal opinion, we're perhaps not doing as we should. We're perhaps a little bit overreacting, although I get cautioned by all my friends that I'm underreacting and I'm being irresponsible. Point taken, accepted. But maybe as a whole society, nevertheless, are we perhaps overreacting? On a practical level, we're causing a lot of problems, psychological even, as we've mentioned, economic, and we're going to talk about the general infrastructure. Our general infrastructures are becoming threatened in some ways. Also, I would suggest maybe even from a religious perspective, are we overreacting? Are we convinced that by washing our hands 5 times, staying away from anyone more than 10 meters, etc., etc., are we doing what's responsible actions and not being careless, or are we being over pedantic? Are we developing paranoia, which I'm calling now caranoia? Paranoia is definitely a new term that needs to be assessed. And maybe sort of thinking it's up to us, it's all up to us. When, as a religious person, I think it's up to God to a certain extent. You do what you can, you do your best, you do your responsible best. You can and you should endure yourself personally a certain amount of discomfort, perhaps a significant amount of discomfort. When it comes to passing such discomfort onto other people, to hurting other people's feelings in the name of protecting them from K-19, that has to be thought more seriously. Everyone will make their own do their own calculations of what's worthwhile, what's appropriate, to what extent is this responsible, and to what extent is this perhaps almost cavalier, almost cruel. But the main point, let's get back to the main point. What can we be doing perhaps better? It looks, to me, there's a possibility, it's impossible to assess what percentage such a possibility is, but that the world is going to be different in the foreseeable future. The way we're going to be reacting together in the public domain is not going to be the same. Therefore, all activity that takes place within such public domain is going to have to be adapted, whether it's social interaction requiring social distancing, or whether it's anything to do with all fields of human endeavor, business endeavor, industry, etc. They're going to have to readapt. As Amazon is being crippled at the moment through workers being overexposed to one another and to the contagious disease passing from one to another, that's going to require re-engineering the way people are in packaged facilities and all other types of industrial environments. So I want to tie that in with lockdown. The government's doing a lot of lockdown. I've suggested that the term maybe should be more locked up. We're being locked up. I would say maybe the imaginative abilities of people in government at the moment are being slightly locked down, and we're being locked up. But what perhaps more thought might be given to is this lockdown is causing a lot of suffering, economic suffering, health suffering, a lot of phobias, a lot of there's going to be domestic violence, as we said, people losing money, losing their jobs. Can we translate this into perhaps a more positive dynamic? Can we say, only governments can say, they can only be said at government level, can we say, look, guys, we're moving, perhaps we have to start engaging the future, and we have to start ameliorating the present. And if we're going for total lockdown, then there's a limit to what we can achieve, very little. There's only so much you can achieve with Zoom, Skype, and email. Perhaps we can start already re-engineering the public thoroughfare, the public workplace. For example, you've got a factory plant that's producing a certain amount of items, and it's, let's say, 100 meters. Until now, it was occupied by, say, let's say it was 100 meters by 50 meters, 5,000 square meters. Let's say it was occupied on average by, manned by, let's say, 200 workers, which means each person has got approximately 20 square meters per person, which is a 2-meter radius per person, because it's 16 square meters, but you're getting close to already being too close for comfort, and there's going to be a lot of dead space. So this factory is going to be basically untenable, and certainly if it was a factory that was smaller, 50 by 50, and had 200 workers, it's going to be untenable from now. So are we going to close this factory down now? So I'm suggesting no. Let's start to think imaginatively, and I mentioned this in the previous lecture. Let's start to initiate working regimes that will accommodate the new requirements. For example, how many hours are there in a day? 24. So let's take till now, on average, most factories, most workplaces would be working probably 8 to 9 hour shifts once a day, normal daylight time, 9 to 5. Let's start reorganizing ourselves. No, we're going to have to work 24 hours, which will enable the required dilution of human presence. There won't be too high concentration of person per square meter. If the 200 workers are able to spread themselves out over a period of 24 hours, 3 shifts, yes, it's going to require certain adaptations on all levels. But if the government can start to put these types of initiatives in place now, I think that's a far more effective way of dealing with containment, dealing with all the problems that the severe lockdown is going to be causing. It's going to create a positive dynamic. It's going to be preparing the country for the future, so that when we do start to emerge, whichever country has adopted this particular attitude, and that was just one small example, they will perhaps be in the forefront of all aspects of endeavor, industrial, economic, human endeavor, that will enable them to move forward in the future in a far more strategically advantageous position. Let's take that even further. As we pursue ever more severe widening and intense and extended lockdown, or lockdown, things are going to start happening not just on the personal level, but as has been pointed out, we can't be productive, obviously, and there's a lot of production that's going to be negatively impacted through this limited activity that we're enabling. This is going to start to affect supply chains. All sorts of products and services are not going to be properly maintained and or produced, and very soon we're going to start to feel shortages in every single aspect of production and service. Let's take particularly, let's say, electronics. And not just the luxury items like fancy screens so you can watch your movies if that's what you want to do, but all electronics, which are a vital resource now for absolutely everything. Most electronic devices are assembled from thousands of various parts, each one fairly sophisticated, and each one itself contains many other sophisticated parts. All of these have to be produced by factories, production facilities, many of which are very specifically tailored for the production of these particular type of components. Thus, when we're starting this lockdown, there's going to be people along the line, managers, workers, factories, that are going to be whose absence is going to halt production of these pieces. Very soon, it's going to become apparent that you can't produce at the end a normal microchip for a computer. You can't produce a normal cell phone. You can't produce a normal medical facility, electronic medical equipment, because one small piece is missing, and it's going to become more than one piece, and it's going to affect the chain along the line, which is going to affect availability. It's going to affect price. If you want to avail yourself of that particular piece, you're going to have to go to some alternative competitor who's going to charge the earth, because he knows he now has the monopoly, because he's the only one that's got not too many workers in lockdown, so he can produce this component. So as I said, this is going to start to affect supply chains in a devastating manner. Very quickly on all, we give an example of electronics. It's going to be in medical supplies. It's going to be in food, which is nowadays the production of food is so sophisticated. We're going to start seeing shortages of food, when theoretically the agriculture is producing still what it needs to. It's possible that the corona is not affecting directly currently too much the base food production, but the food production chain is going to be affected, because it's highly technological, it's highly sophisticated, it's highly integrated. Everything is integrated. You're missing pieces, you're missing personnel, you're missing transportation, or all these are adversely affected. So food is going to start to become scarce, problematic. They're going to have people hiking the prices. These are going to cause extreme soon problems that are going to be felt very acutely. So again, the way I would suggest, let's take Israel, that the government perhaps could be addressing this a present problem, and certainly a future problem. It's going to develop very soon. An imaginative approach might be, again, let's not go for lockdown, which is only increasing our vulnerability, which is only reducing, is increasing the threat on our extremely exposed and vulnerable supply chains. Rather, let's do the opposite. Let's start to consider there's going to be less interaction, there's going to be less import-export communication between countries. So all the parts that are needed, all the services that are needed for the production of everything, countries are going to have to probably become more self-reliant. So therefore, would it not make sense for our governments, let's take Israel, the startup nation, the one who's got all the innovation and imagination, and the manpower, the brain power, the expertise, should we not be saying, oh, let's just wait, let's do a lockdown and just watch the supply chains and all the attendant negative consequences happening? Or should we start taking initiative? Let's start cataloging the products that are vital and that are anticipated to be in short supply, and let's start taking control. It's a wartime effort. Let the government start allocating or encouraging, giving incentives to individuals or companies or factories or whatever it is, plants, to start producing these vital components, start gaining the expertise. Again, therefore, that will have the positive effect of, instead of throwing 500,000 people or 1 million people out of a country of 8 million people into their homes, depressed, impoverished, unnourished, exposed to infection, unable to treat themselves properly. On the contrary, let's give them more jobs. Let's give them a challenge. Let's create perhaps a positive dynamic for the whole country. This is a war effort, guys. Let's all pull together to try and save the country in the present, the immediate, and in the anticipated future. Let's get ourselves geared up to be an integral supplier of products on a world scale, which are going to be in short supply very soon. Again, the country that's able to get this act together in the quickest possible time is going to hopefully do a lot to ameliorate its current condition, but more equally, or more importantly, it's going to be preparing itself for the future to be self-sufficient, which I think is going to be an extremely important strategic quality that every country is going to have to achieve. self-sufficiency, the greatest possible degree of self-sufficiency. It's never going to be absolute. No one has all the natural resources, of all the metals and the oils, etc. But to the great extent possible, I think we have to start developing self-reliance. Yes, for the government to ensure that these efforts are effective, it's going to have to be a little bit forceful with people. You're going to have to work here, you're going to have to do that. It's going to cost money, incentives. But I think it's far less forceful than locking people in the house for months and saying you come out, you're shot, or you're in prison. And it's going to be far less expensive than having to finance the unemployment subsidies and all the social services. They're going to have to cope with all the problems, the attendant problems that are going to arise from all this. It's going to be much more effective economically on the short and long term to channel all these resources, these efforts into positive production. And let's give a specific example. The whole end game currently of the medical profession advising the government in this country, and I think in most countries, is let's try and contain it. We're not going to stop corona. People are not going to, we don't have a vaccine for the next few years, it looks like. Let's close them up, slow the spread of the epidemic to controllable levels. We're going to have to release at some point gradually these lockdowns, and just a bit of social comment again in the interim. The longer and the more severe the lockdowns we do, then it's going to still be extremely difficult to sort of open the floodgates. When we do finally say you're released, it's coming up for Passover, Jewish Festival of Independence and freedom. If you open and say people are now free to move around, not 50 but 60 meters from the house, not for 30 seconds but for 50 seconds. So you think people are going to take it just like that? No, people are going to abuse because they're so desperate for fresh air, they're so desperate for a new view. They're going to take 140 meters, 150 meters. They're going to go out for 70, 80, 90 seconds. You're going to lose control. You're going to have people automatically on a mass scale being in breach of the law. You're not going to be able to control that gradual and nicely controlled exit that people are going to make. So that's another problem with the end game. But let's say the idea is that when it comes, the 2 or 3 months, that we're going to be better prepared medically. We'll have more beds. But more importantly, there's one real main factor that our eyes are on. Everyone's eyes are on. I'm going to call it the Spitfire factor. So you're going to call it the Dyson factor. It's one word. It starts with an R and ends with an R. It's to do with this. It's called a respirator. No one should need it, but whoever does need it should have one. At the moment, the fear is, the statistics are such that compared the graphs of potential victims and availability of respirators don't add up. When you get to a certain point, there's not going to be enough respirators around. Hence, the desperate scramble to slow the epidemic and somehow to consign enough orders of respirators that will be available. It looks like the world market, everyone's is after these respirators, and they're not going to be able to produce them, and they're going to be at absolutely prices are going to be skyrocketing. It's going to be black markets. This itself is creating a tremendous problem. So what about the Spitfire approach, which obviously it can't be perfect, but let's consider that as a part of the dynamic that I'm suggesting, the positive dynamic. World War II, Churchill said, nothing was owed so much to so many by so few, to so few, by so many, so much. He was referring primarily to the pilots, but it was equally, I think, referring to the incredible war effort that Churchill put so much effort into getting wartime munitions production up to a rate that would equal destruction. They would be producing enough munitions so that they would outpace their destruction. Particularly, this was with reference to the Spitfires. The production facility of the Spitfires were perhaps the key to winning the war for the English. And Churchill, he basically allocated everything towards these production facilities, and he was able to get up to an incredible, after a while, It's an incredible amount of production. And the Spitfires, theoretically, that's what won the war, ultimately. They were able to produce more per day than the Germans were able to shoot down. So why not take that and apply it here? Why doesn't Israel and other countries, and I think they are starting to do it on a small scale, agreed, but maybe instead again of laying off 500,000 people, why don't the government suggest, let's take 500, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, however many it is, of the experts, let's pour as much money as needed and as much organizational infrastructure as can be provided, and tell these guys, you're locked in this room. In a week's time, you have to do what Dyson did, you have to produce a new respirator. And yes, there's many pieces that are vital, they're only produced in China, and produced in England, they're produced in Europe, and we can't get hold of them right now. Okay, Israeli innovation, on comes Israeli innovation, Israeli engineering. We made the Arrow, we produced the Merkava, the tank, we almost produced the Lavi plane, all these under pressure in a record time. We've adapted the F-16, so come on, let's produce some respirators. Let's get everyone involved. Again, let's create this positive dynamic, this war effort to produce the respirators in record time. Let's get them up 100 a day, 200 a day. That's going to have incredible benefits. A, for those producing them, obviously. For those producing, they're involved in a positive effort. They're not sitting at home depressed. The money is going into paying them. They're financing tax, they're financing business overall. Yes, it has to be done over in a controlled environment. Everyone has to have their 2 square meters on all sides. They're going to have to work 24 hours. It's going to be part of the war dynamic, the wartime dynamic, which can be very positive. It's channeled in this positive way. Most importantly, the people are going to gain are going to be the potential victims, those who need these respirators. And if we can start integrating production with projection of sick victims who are going to need these respirators, this is going to give the doctors more room to be imaginative. It's going to give the decision makers more room, more time to play with, so they don't have to take these incredible emergency efforts. They don't have to lock down everyone with ever increasing stringency. Why? They're going to look at the graph, not just the graph, how many people are going to be in a desperate situation requiring oxygen and respirators. They're going to say, we've got the graph of the potential sick victims coming up. We've also got the graph, now we're looking at the graph the whole time, every day, of respiratory reproduction. It's going to soon be meeting up, it's soon going to be catching up, it's soon going to be overtaking. Therefore, we can allow ourselves a little bit more time. We can start to relent in the emergency measures we're taking, because we know we can cope. Similarly, not just respirators, also beds and hospital, emergency wards, etc., etc. So this is another way in which I think the positive efforts of government would do well, I think, to heed this approach rather than more and more extreme negative fighting. Finally, a word about, it's almost our penultimately, a word about what this negative approach is going to start producing. In order to police this lockup, this severe limitations of human freedom, we require a lot of police police powers. And the government is using its emergency laws to create police powers that they can police and oversee and observe people's movements on a disturbingly close and invasive level, which is a severe, of course, compromise of human rights. Great. We're starting to, therefore, feel we're starting to get a movement towards totalitarian government. Those in power at the moment are the ones who are controlling. They're deciding the negative measures, the emergency measures that have to be taken. They're the one that are controlling them. They have a lot of power with that. Them and the medical profession, who are in the advisory and also almost controlling capacity at the moment. They're issuing the orders, not just making recommendations, they're giving directives, they're actually ordering, which is what I mentioned in another talk. Now this is a problem. Let's say you've got somebody who's a sort of just on a general level is a lot of sort of an enemy of the state, or an enemy of the politicians, or an enemy of the medical establishment. They theoretically have a lot of power now and a lot of discretion to use this power against political enemies, and who are not really political enemies, but they view them as such. Let's take, for example, now the movement towards sanitariums. They want to start taking a lot of the sick and the lockdowns, the isolated people who are in forced isolation. They want to start moving them out into sanitariums, leper colonies, I might call them, where probably they're going to be forced to stay. And how they're going to, and so let's say you got a guy, let's say it's one of the ministers in a particular regime in any country doesn't like what some journalist is writing about something, or what some doctor is saying, or some economist is proposing, or whatever, doesn't like. He can, and we're introducing random testing, random massive testing, so he can very easily manipulate the orders such that the enemy, this particular public enemy, will be randomly tested, and he can make sure that the test comes through, oh, positive, oh, and Mr. Rebel will say, why did I test positive? I know I'm not positive, I'm not carrying at the moment, I'm going to do my own private test and prove to you that I'm not a carrier. No, government doesn't accept these private tests. Therefore, you have been determined to be a carrier. You are now required legally to relocate yourself to this facility. Boom, you're off the map. You're in Siberia, finished. It is reminiscent, yes, of other totalitarian regimes who were able to use such force against their own citizens. More importantly, if we're going to continue this lockdown, which is going to create a lot of economic and many other pressures and stresses, as we've mentioned, as time within the next month or two, when either lockdown is starting to be released, or even if it's not, but people are going to start to be getting more and more desperate. Economic situation, their personal situation, their emotional state is going to very possibly start becoming far more agitated. They can't get supplies. They don't have money for supplies. They're desperate. There's going to be a start of social disintegration. People are going to start doing things they shouldn't be doing. Crime is going to start rising. How do you deal with that? How's the government going to deal with that? Well, we've got the magic answer. We've already got this very strong police force. We've got this totalitarian almost regime, which till now maybe was benign, it was well-meaning, as I'm sure it is in all cases. I have no. One sec. Okay, sorry, we were interrupted by the secretary. Work has to go on, and everything else, while there still is. So we're saying, boom, you got the magic answer. We got this totalitarian regime, and all the police controls, all the laws in place. So we can deal very effectively now with social discord. So I lost the thread a bit. I'm not exactly sure where I was up to, but we're talking about the totalitarian regime continuing itself by necessity in an ongoing near future, foreseeable future. And I don't really see a way out of it. Once you've got this totalitarian regime in place, and it almost by definition has to continue, because the population is so now uncontrollable, needs such strong policing because of all the conditions, and partly because they're not particularly enamored with their government, with the current government regime. Therefore, all these circumstances require a very strong hand from the government, and an ongoing hand. Stalin for 20 years, 30 years, whatever it was, he never released. He was never able to release, because the minute he would release, there would just be even greater chaos for him and for everyone else, as is with most such totalitarian regimes. I can't think of any, I'm sure there are, and some historians will maybe tell me, where there was a benign somehow demise of the regime into an equitable and benign and favorable democracy. South Africa, whatever. Anyway, that's I think another very good reason why governments should be very, very, and citizens should be very concerned that we don't get ourselves into this particular situation where we're sort of basically dependent on such a government control. I'm going to take this call, it's the business line. Okay, so we've said, let's try and be positive. That's really what we're saying here. I think that's what we're saying in all the little talks we've given. Let's just finish off with it's a worrying time. So let's try and give something positive, some strategies. Everyone's got their own strategies for coping, whether it's deep breathing, whether it's focusing on nice colors, on good memories, etc. I'm just going to add to that, because no one really knows in the future what's down the line for us, for anyone, as individuals and as collectives. Um, I saw an article recently: uncertain future for the production of Chinese electric cars, implying that every other human endeavor has got a certain future. No, I think it has to be news where there is a certain future for any endeavor or person. So within that uncertainty, obviously one starts contemplating life, religion, God, my role here, what am I doing here? So I'm going to add one little thing to that, which I call gratitude. Gratitude is always good. What I mean is like this: when we're not quite sure what's going to be tomorrow, what's around the corner, gratitude can be good for that as well. Can give us a greater sense of well-being. Why? The thoughts that one might have, hey, what's going to be tomorrow? So if tomorrow is all is lost, then that's a depressing thought on the first level when it comes to, wow, what's going to be tomorrow? It's all is lost. Things are terrible. Yes and no. Yes, it's terrible because everything is lost. No, but let's look at the good side of things. Look at where we've been till now. Many people have said in social comment, they would have given anything to be alive in this 21st and 20th century, post-war, because really human beings had it great. It could be we're now paying the price for having it too great. But with all the amenities, all the comforts, all the opportunities, all the technologies that have been available to the human race, it could be, yes, because we purged nature too much. But nevertheless, everyone's had a great time. So gratitude is a sort of the attitude of saying, yeah, till now, I've had a great life. Till now, everything's been good. I've been comfortable. I've had so much given to me. I would say it's given by God. You might say it's given by nature, given by society, everyone in their own particular currency. But if we're grateful, yeah, I've had a great time. It's been so good. So yeah, maybe tomorrow it's going to be more difficult. It's going to be more compromised. But the overall picture is a very positive one. And it's a time for that type of positive reflection. So on that positive note, I'm going to wish everyone good health. And may we meet and continue to meet in good times. I'm going to try and post some more useful talks online about, like what I'm saying, what my Jewish studies, philosophical thoughts based on scripture and Talmudics, a little bit of science and creator. I'm a creationist, but maybe we'll talk a little bit about these sort of topics, try and show my perspective where these things lead to us. I hope you'll enjoy that, and as I say, all the best to everyone, and thank you for watching. Even if you didn't watch, and if you're not watching now, I still thank you for letting me talk, even if you're not watching and you're choosing not to. Thank you. All the best.